Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar titled Exploring Collaborative Concepts, Delegated Design, and Design Assist. We're now at the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Mike Koger, and I am your presenter for this program. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself before I get down to the business of talking about delegated design and design assist. I'm an attorney who has been working with the AIA Contract Documents program for about 7.5 years in some form or another. I work with a very dedicated group of attorneys, outside advisors, and volunteer architects who are responsible for creating and revising the AIA's contract documents library. Prior to working at the AIA, I started my work as an attorney as a private practicing attorney for a number of years before doing things like construction litigation and transactional work on construction-related matters. Before that, I actually started my career as an architect, practiced architecture for about 5 years or so around the mid-2000s before moving to the legal side of the construction industry. So over all of that time, I've actually got to see how collaborative practices like delegated design and design assist have evolved over the past 15 or 20 years or so from a few different perspectives. So over the next 50 minutes to an hour, I'm going to be talking to you about some of the work that we've been doing with the American Institute of Architects in collaboration with the American Institute of Steel Construction to better understand delegated design and design assist. Over the past couple of years, we've been talking extensively with the folks over at the American Institute of Steel Construction about these topics. We've also interviewed a whole bunch of people in the design and construction industry about their practices, and we've been asking folks what these terms mean to them on their projects and how they use them and how they differentiate them. We've also done a fair amount of research into case law and how courts have interpreted these terms as well. We've also taken a look at how different states treat delegated design and design assist, and we'll get into some of that here in a little bit in this program. The takeaways, after this work that we've been doing with the AISC is that we created a paper that you can find on our website, and I'll show you the links here in just a moment, that give what we consider to be pretty good definitions for delegated design and design assist, and to give folks in the industry some kind of guidance from our trade associations about what we believe those terms to mean. Some of the things that we learned during the last couple of years in investigating design collaboration is that there is a pretty good common understanding in the industry about terms like delegated design and design assist, but there's enough misinformation out there that people do tend to get confused sometimes about these phrases. So just anecdotally, for every 5 or 6 websites that you click on that have an article about design assist, one of them is going to say something that is different than the other 4 or 5. So there's enough misinformation out there that we thought it would be wise for us to get together as 2 different trade associations and actually set forth a benchmark for expectations. Not that everyone has to adopt our definitions for these terms and the way we use them, but we at least want to give folks an opportunity to, if they have questions about delegated design and design assist, we can provide them some resources so that there's at least a starting off point for discussions when you get on a project that's going to be using some of these collaborative techniques. Over the next hour, I'm going to be talking about some of the benefits of delegated design and design assist. I'm also going to talk about some of the drawbacks and some of the things to be looking out for from a risk perspective when you are engaged in those activities. I'll talk a little bit about some court decisions that give us a glimpse into how courts in various jurisdictions might decide issues related to delegated design and design assist. I'm not going to do a deep dive into that, but I will touch on a couple of cases that I think are important and interesting. Also, I have to mention that I can't give legal advice in this video, in this webinar. I'm talking broadly about these topics, but if you have issues with regard to these kinds of collaborative techniques that you need specific advice on, I always recommend that folks talk to someone an attorney who's licensed in their jurisdiction to give that kind of legal advice. Lastly, this program has been approved for 1 credit or 1 learning unit credit with the American Institute of Architects. You should be seeing that on your transcript here in the next few weeks if you've signed up for this program. So if you do not actually get that, then just let us know, send us an email, and we'll make sure you get your learning unit. Okay, so I mentioned the paper that we jointly wrote with the American Institute of Steel Construction. And if you're interested in reading the paper, it's going to be a lot more in depth than what I'm going to be talking about in this program. You can do so for free at the websites that are listed on this slide. I should also talk a minute about the relationship between AIA and AISC. It was something of a natural fit for us, for both of our trade associations, to create something like this. We have been hearing for years at the AIA, and we know that folks at AISC have been hearing from their membership, but there was confusion about these terms. So we wanted to make sure we're giving people input that was from both the design perspective and from the construction perspective as well. While we were creating this paper, we got a lot of outside input from folks with the ABA's Construction Forum, the AIA's Risk Management Committee, the AIA's Documents Committee. We talked to contractors and subs, a lot of that kind of stuff you'll see synthesized in the slides and the materials to follow. Also, the folks at AISC reached out to their broad network of contacts. So we got a ton of people who gave input into this paper and into many of the remarks that I'm going to be making in this program. One thing I should let folks know is that part one of this paper and all the material I'm going to talk about today is quite general in nature about delegated design and design assist, but there is going to be a part two at some point here in 2021, and that is going to be all about delegated design and design assist, specifically when it comes to structural steel connections. No surprise that AISC is going to be taking the lead on that, as they are the experts in structural steel connections and all things related to it. So we're going to be hopefully publishing a paper here towards the middle or end of this year. That time frame will come a little bit more certain as we move forward in 2021. So be on the lookout for part two of that paper for more guidance on delegated design and design assist. So enough with the big premise and the big picture stuff. This slide shows design collaboration on construction projects in the big picture of what we are trying to accomplish in providing some guidance on delegated design and design assist. Those terms, combined with the term design build, are all confusingly similar sounding phrases. Our position is that there is a spectrum of design collaboration, starting with something that I'll call informal involvement, which is a casual conversation between a design professional and a contractor with no contractual underpinnings, then to design assist, where there is a contractual arrangement for a builder to provide input at the design phase, but there is no transfer of design responsibility. Onward to delegated design, further moving down that continuum of design collaboration, where there is a transfer of design responsibility for a portion or elements of the project, through all the way to design build, which is of course a project delivery method where a design build entity takes on the entirety of the design responsibility for the project. So I'm going to be talking very little about design build. In fact, these are my remarks with regard to design build. It is kind of the furthest along the spectrum in design collaboration. The far majority of my remarks today are going to be about design assist and delegated design. This is the big landscape that we see that I'm going to be covering here over the next handful of minutes, and I'm going to talk through each of these a little bit more slowly. The first one that I'll talk about is informal involvement. Obviously, this is not a commonly used phrase in the industry, right? Although no one really uses this phrase, it does describe a practice that happens all the time. It is that informal discussion between a design professional and a contractor, a trade contractor, or a material supplier about a particular design issue or product. With informal involvement, there's no contract, no compensation, and no expectation that the design professional will be able to rely on that information. So my example of this, when I used to do architecture as a very young architect back in the early 2000s, I used to, maybe go out to have drinks with folks who were in the construction industry, or call them up, if I had a particular issue, and we might talk about just some random connection detail or something that I needed a little bit of input on. There was never any expectation in those kind of informal settings where I just picked up the phone and called a friend that I'd be able to actually rely on their input. They're just giving me a little bit of assistance, but there's no contract between me and my buddy or my friend who is a contractor who just happens to know more than I do about a particular detail. So the reason we want to put a bit of a definition to this level of informal involvement is we don't want this to distract folks from the more contractual nature of design assist and delegated design. So I'm not going to spend any more time on it. Just recognize that there's all kinds of collaboration between designers and contractors that does not rise to the level of design assist, that doesn't have a contractual underpinning of some sort. So that brings me to design assist, and this is the definition that we settled on. I'm not going to read the entire thing here, but I will focus on a few key features. First, the contractor and their subs are merely assisting the design professional in a design assist scenario. They're not taking on full control of any aspect of the design or preparing formal construction documents in any way. The contractor isn't signing or sealing drawings or otherwise acting as the designer of record for any piece of the project. And what naturally flows from this is that the design professional maintains control over all aspects of the preparation of the construction documents, including the responsibility to integrate contractor-provided information into the design and identify and resolve design conflicts. One thing that you'll notice if you read through the paper that I mentioned earlier, and also in my remarks, throughout the rest of this program, is that I'm going to be using the terms contractor and design professional very broadly. When it comes to design assist, it is certainly not just general contractors who are doing these kinds of activities. It's often construction managers who come onto a project during the pre-construction phase, and it's certainly also sub-trades and material suppliers who are doing these kinds of design assist services as well. But I'm just going to be I'll be using the term contractor as kind of a shorthand, but really there is design assist kind of activities that go up and down the entire spectrum of the construction chain. Also, another thing that can be somewhat confusing that I should take a moment to address is it is very possible to do design assist services of the nature that I just mentioned, assisting the design professionals in developing their drawings and specifications, and then eventually take on a delegated design responsibilities through something like performance specifications later on in the project. So you could very easily do design assist followed by, or piggybacked on, to delegated design later on in the project. So we want to make sure that folks are understanding there's a difference between those two things, and you could certainly do them together, but we don't want folks to get confused if they're potentially doing one and then the other and then just calling it all one thing. So now that I have a definition for what design assist is, I'm going to lay the groundwork for why it's useful. And the first thing, pretty obviously, is that design assist allows the design team to get input from builders early on while the design is still being developed. That can come in the form of generalized input about things like cost estimating or scheduling. The reality is that contractors and construction managers are going to be far better than architects about coming up with realistic cost estimates and project schedules, because they're just the ones who are going to be doing the actual work and engaging with the sub-trades on a regular basis. And having that kind of real-time data from a builder about cost estimating and scheduling during design can be a very helpful thing to an owner to help eliminate a whole bunch of unknowns. But design input can also be much more specific and targeted to a particular component of the work. And we certainly learned that when we were talking to folks about their practices with design assist. So an architect or a structural engineer might be able to benefit from a subcontractor's knowledge of a particular building system because that subcontractor is working with that system every single day. And a good example of this is building envelope systems. An architect, I know when I did architecture, I knew a couple of different cladding or curtain wall systems in extreme detail, but there are just so many different options out there available in the marketplace that your average architect can't possibly be experts on every building envelope system. But the people who can be experts on them are the subs who regularly work with those specific systems, or who actually manufacture the system. They can be your experts on that particular system. And it's pretty easy to imagine how they can provide the design team with valuable information regarding things like installation, input, attachment details, waterproofing details, connection with other materials on the project, and so on. There's also a handful of other good things that can come out of using design assist on your projects. It's going to be helpful to the owner and the design team if the folks who are giving design assist services can identify things that might have a long lead time. So if there's any need for early procurement to make sure that you get equipment or materials on the site early, the construction folks are going to be the ones who are in the best position to determine that and help identify those things. Also, there's a notion that doing design assist and bringing on someone like perhaps a construction manager and their team early to the project can ease the transition from design to construction. Everybody on this call here has probably worked on a project where it's been the design, bid, build traditional scenario where the design team is somewhat working in a vacuum. They're coming up with their designs, putting together a full set of construction documents, and then bidding the project out. And as soon as the construction team starts to get, familiarized with the drawings and specifications, there's a bit of a difficulty in actually like onboarding and understanding the project. And oftentimes you'll have a handful of RFIs right up front from the construction team trying to figure out and to get on board with the project and get up to speed with things. Design assist, at least if it's done right, offers a potential benefit of cutting out some of that transition period and making it an easier transition from design to construction, because presumably the folks who are doing the construction have been on the project for a while and are somewhat familiar with the plans and specifications. So now that we know what design assist is and why it's useful, I thought I'd share some of the feedback that we receive from folks who actually do design assist services regularly. The responses that you're seeing are anonymous. As you can see, while CMs and trade contractors provide a wide range of design assist services, one thing that's pretty universal is the type of input that builders are providing in a design assist scenario. They're going to be providing input based on their own expertise as builders. And this is one of the main differences that we identified between design assist and delegated design. In design assist, the contractors and subs are providing input about things like installation, constructability, job site logistics, scheduling, and so on, construction related input. In delegated design, the contractors are going to be providing professional design services, often through a second licensed design professional. And we talked to folks, who provided a wide range of design assist services on projects. But we also talked to some folks who had been doing design assist for a while, and they had done things that went beyond what I would ever consider to be design assist, even going as far as doing things like full-scale mock-ups or prototypes of portions of a building in order to help the design team understand something about that particular system. And the folks that we talked to that did that level of design assist services, they might have started off by doing design assist at kind of a light level for free or at a discounted rate, but they were able to, sell owners on the value that they were able to generate from their design assist services, and eventually get to these more nuanced services like creating a prototype and actually get paid for those things. So it's for contractors and CMs who are in the realm of design assist, it's helpful to think of those things as potentially real revenue generating kinds of activities if you can convince owners that they're getting real value out of it. I'm now going to move into some specifics about design assist services and what they entail. I mentioned before that I've been working with AIA contracts on a day-to-day basis for quite a few years now. So I'm just going to shamelessly tie design assist and delegated design back to our contracts. And from our perspective, the most common design assist services are those that are found in the pre-construction phase of projects done in a construction manager at-risk delivery method. You're going to find the same services that I'll be talking about as far as in the construction manager at risks. You'll also find them in CM as advisor projects as well. These are things like cost estimating, scheduling, establishing BIM protocols, providing recommendations about equipment and materials, and constructability reviews. The A133-2019 Owner Construction Manager Agreement, Section 3.1 is where you're going to find the bulk of these pre-construction phase services. So if you actually want to see what contract language exists out there that we would consider to be design assist in nature, take a look at that section, and you'll also find, like I said, you'll also find it in the construction manager as advisor agreement as well. And practically speaking, while the A133 describes all of the pre-construction phase design assist services in section 3.1 as being the responsibility of the construction manager, realistically, the construction manager is going to be passing a lot of those responsibilities down to its subcontractors and trade contractors. So in looking at the A133 and some of the specific contract language in there, I want to highlight one particular provision that I think gets to the heart of design assist services from a contractual perspective. That's section 3.1.1. It's the one that's on the screen here. This section clarifies that the construction manager is not acting as a licensed professional in providing these services, yet the construction manager does have a responsibility to exercise reasonable care in performing the pre-construction phase services that it provides. Also, the architect and owner have the right to rely on information and services furnished by the construction manager. So from a regulatory perspective, the architect and the design team is going to be responsible for the design, but they will have some recourse back to the construction manager for inaccurate information or for services that are provided that fall below that reasonable care standard. Moving on to also kind of show some of the contractual language that we believe to be design assist in nature. In my opinion, the highest value thing that construction managers and their teams do during the design phase is cost estimating. Others might disagree with me on that, but I think that providing cost estimates on a real-time basis during design is very important. You'll notice that in section 3.16.1, actually the 3.16 is actually broken down into two types of cost estimating. Subsection 1, the construction manager is required to prepare a preliminary estimate of the cost of the work using area, volume, or similar conceptual estimating techniques. But as the design progresses, the construction manager must update the cost estimate with increasing detail and refinement. And I'm quoting here from further on down. Subsection 2 requires the construction manager to include in the estimate things like cost to allow for the further development of the design, price escalation, and market conditions until the GMP is agreed upon. Now, as architects all know, we tend to do the first kind of estimating. We'll do that area, volumetric, or similar conceptual estimating, but it is construction managers and folks in the construction realm that are uniquely qualified to do that higher level of detail and refinement that is included in 3.1.6. The second best value, in my opinion, that a construction manager and their team can provide during the design phase, that is design assist in nature, comes down to scheduling. And this is something that the design team, practically speaking, just doesn't have the ability to provide a lot of guidance on during the design of a project. Designers, we might have a general idea of how long a project could take and the techniques to adjust, a schedule in some way, perhaps by doing phasing of a project or something. But the design team just is not going to be responsible for construction logistics or understanding labor markets. So we're not in a very good position to help the owner understand the project schedule from a holistic perspective, particularly when it comes to the construction activities. In my time as an architect, and admittedly, I was only practicing as an architect for about 5 years. So I was a relatively young architect at that time. I had no expertise in construction scheduling whatsoever. I might be able to do rudimentary cost estimates, but when it came down to actually scheduling a project or thinking about the construction schedule, did not have a lot of background in that. And you can see here that the kind of scheduling that is required of a construction manager is quite holistic in nature. I mean, it doesn't just include the CM's activities, it includes their pre-construction phase activities, the architect's services, the work of other consultants, and even things that would fall under the owner's responsibility. Section 3.14 of the A133 also requires the CM to periodically update the project schedule as the design progresses. Eventually, it should get to a point where it includes the submission date of the GMP proposal, the subcontract commencement and completion times, ordering and delivery of products, and the owner's occupancy requirements. So as time is going on, the construction manager is going to be providing a further level of detail of the schedule to include very realistic things like delivery of products. So if you are thinking about design assist services, certainly in a construction manager realm, this is obviously the kind of language that might be already inserted into your contract if you're using an A133, but it also might be language that you would want to look at to get an idea of what scheduling services might be required or desirable. I know that when I did work on, as an attorney in private practice and as an architect, when I did work on projects that were in occupied spaces, scheduling of this level was one of the most important items that the owners were concerned about, having to move folks around and how long can folks be out of their particular spaces. It's been my experience that most construction managers and most folks who do design assist services are very good at things like cost estimating and scheduling, but it is the other kinds of pre-construction phase services that fall more in broadly to the consultation realm, where folks who are doing design assist services really can separate themselves out. And Section 3.1.3 of the A133 Owner Construction Manager Agreement is full of items that, if done right, can be a big help to the design team. And I think this section really encompasses all of the activities that can fall under that big broad heading of design assist. It includes things like, contractors and construction managers providing input on things like the availability of materials and labor, identifying time requirements for procurement, also, providing input on installation and construction techniques, and even providing, a further level of analysis on cost, not just doing estimating, but doing things like construction cost consulting. So helping the design team come up with a more efficient and cost, conscious way of doing a design. Other services that are included in here would be things like helping identify, what particular systems might be preferable to do in a prefabrication methodology rather than doing everything on site, and also helping the design team come up with BIM protocols that can be useful, not just during design, but also through to construction, if that's something that is desirable for the project. Getting back to some more results from our conversations with construction managers and their subs, as you can see, design assist services get particularly varied when it gets down to the trade contractor level. So in a CM design assist scenario, the CM itself might be providing general cost estimating or scheduling services with input from their subs. It's the subs themselves will be doing things that might even be more nuanced, like that relate specifically to their trade. One more thing before I get into talking about how folks get paid for design assist services and some of the pitfalls that can befall design assist services, is another defining feature of design assist is that it happens well before delegated design typically occurs on a project. The folks that we talked to about design assist uniformly stated that design assist services happen during the schematic and design development phases while the design professionals are still working on their drawings and specifications. This is something very different than delegated design, which usually occurs after the design package has been completed. When we talk to folks about design assist, they again, uniformly, folks said the earlier the design assist services are done and the earlier the design assist providers are incorporated onto the project, the better the results were. And no surprise, early design assist input was perceived more as true collaboration. Late design assist input was seen more skeptically as, value engineering or second guessing. So if you're going to be bringing on, if you're an owner listening to this, if you're going to be bringing on a construction manager or anybody else to do design assist services, definitely bring them on earlier rather than later. So contract and payment for design assist services is where we found a pretty good deal of divergence amongst folks we talked to. In CM at risk projects, of course, you're going to have something like the A133 that's going to be in place between the construction manager and the owner with downstream subcontracts that might have design assist services cooked into them. But we also talked with owners who've had direct contracts with key subcontractors for design assist services. We've even seen some contracts between design professionals and subcontractors for these kinds of services, but those tended to be the far outliers. One other thing that we learned from folks who had been doing design assist for a while is that compensation is critical. You tend to get what you pay for when it comes to design assist. So free design assist services tended to be far less useful and valuable than those that where you actually provided the design assist entities with consideration or with actual payment for their services. So there's a handful of issues. I've been talking mostly in terms that are pretty positive with regard to Design Assist, talking about the benefits and all the good things about it. But I don't want to imply that Design Assist doesn't come without some serious problems in some cases. I've already talked about the compensation issue, but you often hear contractors sarcastically refer to the term pre-construction phase services as pre-con services. There's also a sense from contractors that when they provide Design Assist services, they are seen as buying into design problems, and they are less likely to be able to avail themselves of the spurred doctrine. I'm going to be talking about that in just a moment with a case, but it is a very real concern for contractors and construction folks who are doing Design Assist. From a design professional's perspective, you often hear from architects that contractors aren't adding real value. They're just, second guessing or trying to get the work and or trying to, make suggestions to maybe cover their behinds when it comes time to actually build the project. Also, another potential downside of Design Assist is that anytime you add new layers of review to the design process, you're just going to make the entire design process slower. So I just wanted to underscore here that there's definitely potential for real benefits with Design Assist, but there's equal potential for downsides if Design Assist is not done right, if the parties are not kind of all on the same page about the nature and manner of Design Assist services. Okay, I'm getting to my first case here, and this is the buying into design problems issue that you'll hear from contractors. And I have to tell you, I just start this conversation by telling you a little bit about the spurred doctrine. If you haven't heard of it, you should definitely become familiar with it. It is a rule that when an owner provides a contractor with plans and specifications to build a project, the owner supplies an implied warranty that the plans and specifications will be adequate to construct the project. So if there are things like delays or additional cost due to defective plans, the contractor can then come back to the owner and seek additional compensation. This rule comes from a very old Supreme Court case called Spurred versus the United States. It was decided all the way back in 1918, and it's been around literally over 100 years. You'll see plenty of cases out there. Just type in Spurred in Google, and you'll find plenty of cases that have to do with this implied warranty of adequacy that owners provide contractors when they hand over a set of plans and specifications. The case that I think is really interesting when it comes to Design Assist is Coghlin Electrical Contractors versus Gilbane. I'm probably not going to be able to talk about this long enough to do it justice, but it's a case out of Massachusetts. It's fairly new, 2015, and it addresses the spurred doctrine in the context of Design Assist services. And if you're providing Design Assist services, you should definitely know about this case and read it, find it, and read it, and understand it. The facts are pretty straightforward. A state hospital hired Gilbane as a construction manager at risk to build a psychiatric facility. Gilbane then hired Coghlin as an electrical subcontractor. Somewhere along the way, Coghlin ran into some problems installing the electrical system, and this was because the plenum space between the ceiling and the bottom of the structural steel was designed at 2 feet, but when it really should have been 5 feet. Now, I think that is, anybody who's at all familiar with construction knows that is a massive discrepancy. If you're expecting 2 feet or 5 feet and you end up with 2 feet of plenum space. And you can certainly see how, and there's the case itself, you read through it, it really doesn't explain how that happened, how Coghlin expected 5 feet and then arrived with plans that only showed 2 feet. But you can certainly see how a narrowing of a plenum space, would have made things like installing electrical and mechanical systems far more difficult. So the way this case worked out, Coghlin sued Gilbane under a spurred basis, and then Gilbane sues the owner under the same theory, basically arguing that the owner breached the implied warranty of adequacy of the plans. So the court takes up the question of whether or not an owner gives an implied warranty regarding the plans and specifications in a CM at risk project. So in other words, does this spurred doctrine that I've been talking about apply to construction manager projects where the construction manager and their teams have been involved with design? So, they should have at least some better understanding of the plans they were working from than your average contractor who got them and had to learn them cold. The conclusion that the court comes up with is that yes, the owner does give an implied spurred warranty, but it is more limited than in a design build project. And here's what should be concerning to folks who do provide Design Assist services. And I quoted some language here I think is literally straight from the case, and I think it's really good. I'm not going to read it all, but it boils down to this: the more design services you perform as a contractor, the less you can rely on that spur and warranty. So you need to be able to, if you're going to be relying on drawings and specifications, you have to show that your reliance on them was reasonable and in good faith. So I think, applying that to Coghlin Electrical, it's, the argument would be, did you know that you had only a 2 foot of plenum space? And, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but that's the kind of analysis rather than just was 2 feet not enough. So something that, contractors should be aware of, certainly when they're doing design assist services. You might not get that spur and warranty that you've come to be able to rely on. Okay, so that is a whole lot of information about design assist. I hope it was kind of helpful in framing at least how we've been able to define design assist. Moving on to delegated design, this is the definition that we came up with. We define it as when a contractor assumes responsibility for an element or portion of the design. And that phrase, element or portion, is very important. We're not talking about delegating the entirety of the design. That would fall probably under like design build or something like that. But we're talking about just delegating a piece of it, typically something that is fairly complex and that can be better and more efficiently performed by a design professional who specializes in that particular system. In delegated design, the contractor's design responsibilities are usually set by a performance specification prepared by a design professional. The contractor may incur liability for the portion of the delegated design and may assume professional design responsibility for its design. The contractor may even be required to sign and seal drawings that it prepares, and of course that's usually going to be done by a second licensed design professional that the contractor hires. So there's two major benefits to using delegated design on a project. The first is efficiency. It would be extremely inefficient for the design team to literally design every minute detail of a project. Things like truss calculations are a pretty good example of this, and one that has been around forever. As an architect, I've worked on dozens of homes that have made use of trusses. In college, I even remember, being taught how to design trusses. Not that I remember any bit of that, but I've never actually had to design a truss in real life. And my guess is that many structural engineers haven't either. And that's because companies who actually provide trusses to consumers do the engineering for them and provide those calculations. It is just far more efficient for the design to be done in that way rather than to have the design team try and design truss members on each project. So the same thing can be true for fire protection systems, curtain wall systems, retaining walls, portions of mechanical systems, and a whole bunch of other components on a project. It's just more quick and cheaper to delegate the design of those items downstream to subcontractors and material suppliers. The second benefit of delegated design is that it allows contractors to innovate to solve design challenges. So rather than having the design team specify one way to solve a problem, the design team can simply indicate the desired result in the form of a performance specification and then allow the contractors and their subs who are bidding on it to come up with their own proposal for achieving that result. Not only might you get a better result, you might actually get a cheaper one as well. So delegated design itself can be a confusing term for some folks because it sounds like the entirety of design has been handed off from one party to the other. The reality of delegated design is that there is some level of split design responsibility going on. In almost any delegated design scenario, there is some level of split responsibility. After all, the primary design professional is going to be responsible for at least establishing the criteria that the delegated designer must achieve. So this slide, I think, is probably the most the best one as far as describing the division of responsibility between the primary design professional and the contractor and the delegated designer. So it usually starts by the primary design professional being responsible for signing and sealing the construction documents. Those construction documents are going to contain design criteria for elements of design that are delegated. So it'll have things like performance specifications in them. Then it is going to be the responsibility of the contractor and the delegated designer the secondary designer to actually achieve the design criteria established by the construction documents. They might be doing things like signing and sealing drawings and specifications if they're required, and then passing them back to the primary design professional, whose responsibility it will be to review the delegated designer's submittals for conformance with the design concept. It's one thing that primary design professionals, your architects and engineers, should be aware of is not to overstep the bounds and attempt to re-engineer or redesign something that has already been delegated. When you're going to be reviewing submittals provided by that secondary designer, usually the way it is done, and at least the way you'll see it in the AIA's contract documents, you're going to be reviewing the submittals for conformance with the design concept, right? Relatively light touch as far as reviewing the work of the other designer. Then it's going to be and this is a very important responsibility of the primary design professional, it's going to be the primary design professional's responsibility to coordinate the delegated design with related work. So remember earlier I said that delegated design is usually just a component of the work. The primary design professional still has the responsibility to make sure that all of the other materials and systems that would need to integrate in with that delegated portion of the work actually integrate properly. And that's not a small responsibility. That's actually fairly big. And when you have issues with delegated design, oftentimes that's where things fall through the cracks. Okay, so here I just want to show that the A201 that everyone probably knows does have a process for delegated design already built into it. And there's going to be no surprise that the way we define delegated design in the language that I've already talked about in the paper that we wrote with AISC is going to be matching up with the way the A201 works. I'm paraphrasing here, but the A201 sets up a process where the primary design professional can delegate portions of the design through the contract documents that it prepares. And if that happens, the architect is required to specify all performance and design criteria that the delegated design services must satisfy. A couple of things to be aware of. This language in the A201, our delegated design language in the A201, it's a little bit buried. So if you actually do a word search on the A201, you're not even going to find the term delegated design in it. And you also, it's going to be kind of buried here in section 3.1.12.10 subsection 1. So this is something that will not immediately stand out to you as delegated design. But folks who've been using the A201 for a number of years will pretty unanimously say that this is the A201's delegated design language. There's actually some case law out of New York that makes the same point from the late 90s that actually gets to the same point and calls this the standard for delegated design. And while I'm talking about other states, it's, when it comes to delegated design, it's not at all uncommon to have state statutes that do deal with delegated design in some way. I know New York has one. I believe Florida also has a statute that allows delegated design and puts some parameters on it. But there are probably other states out there as well. We have not done a deep dive into figuring out all the states that have delegated design statutes. So just if you're in a jurisdiction and you're curious about whether or not your state or your jurisdiction allows it, make sure you search your local laws with regard to delegated design to see if there are any parameters or rules that are put up that might cause you an issue. So getting back to the A201, it also captures the idea that when a contractor assumes delegated design responsibilities, it's often going to be having to hire a secondary design professional to provide those services. Again, a big distinction between delegated design and design assist. Delegated design, often going to be hiring a second design professional. Design assist, you actually have the contractors providing input from their perspective as a construction professional. There's also an important two-way reliance dynamic that exists in a delegated design scenario, something that's also going to be found in the A201. The contractor is, and I've highlighted the operable sentences that are separated a little bit here, but the contractor is entitled to rely on the adequacy and accuracy of the performance and design criteria, while the owner and architect are going to be entitled to rely on the adequacy and accuracy of the services, certifications, and approvals performed by the contractor's design team. So just as with design assist, there's no shortage of potential problems that can arise in delegated design. And we talked to a number of folks who do delegated design who kind of sunk these points in. First, if you talk to contractors who do delegated design, they often feel like they are caught in the middle of two design professionals. Most contractors that I've talked to, they don't particularly want to do delegated design work, but the reality of how projects are bid out, they might actually need to take on some delegated design responsibilities just to get the job. So there is a bit of an uneasy kind of sandwiching of the contractor between two design professionals that goes on with most delegated design scenarios. I also mentioned earlier that there's going to be split responsibility of design in almost all delegated design scenarios. That tends to lead to split liability when it comes to a problem. Realistically speaking, if you're an owner out there who's got like a water leak issue with a curtain wall or some kind of other exterior cladding, you're not going to be able to figure out, you're not going to be able to know inherently whose fault it was, contractor, primary design professional, secondary design professional. So you're going to sue both, right? And the way the liability issues tend to work themselves out is that if there are any kinds of issues or defects with the performance specification itself, then the primary design professional is going to be responsible. Similarly, if you have issues with the integration of the delegated design portion of the work with other parts of the work that are adjacent to it, that integration is the responsibility of the primary design professional, and any liability that comes out of it is going to fall on the primary design professional. Also, secondary design professional is going to be responsible for achieving the design criteria. So if there's any problems with that delegated portion of the design and actually achieving the design criteria, that's going to fall onto the secondary design professional. So that can get a little bit muddy if you have anytime you have two design professionals on a project that are sharing responsibility in some way. There's also more spear-in problems. It probably is not going to come as a surprise that you are not going to get, as a contractor, the same level of warranty of adequacy of plans and specifications if you are actually taking on design responsibility and creating your own drawings and specifications. And I'm going to get to that in another case that I'll talk about next. From designers' perspective, it's important, sometimes, and I've probably done this in the past when I was doing architecture, I've labeled something as a performance specification, and then it has actual prescriptive elements all over the place. So I've kind of created a bit of a hybrid performance and prescriptive specification. That can actually cause problems, particularly when it comes to figuring out liability for issues that might result from delegated design. Also, there are going to be just some things that you can't delegate. For example, in the structural steel realm, some things you can't delegate as a matter of state law. So you want to be aware of that and figure out the laws of your own jurisdiction. We also heard from some folks that we talked to, designers and contractors alike, that owners are a bit hesitant to allow delegated design. And it's a little bit troubling because, delegated design, when it comes to certain things, is almost a guarantee to happen on a project. But the sense from owners that, at least the reporting that we had heard, was that owners were a bit, they had felt like they had vetted their design team, and they were concerned that major components of the project were going to be designed by other design professionals that they had no input in actually bringing onto a project. So something to be aware of if you're an architect out there or an engineer who's planning on using delegated design. You might get a little pushback from owners. We've heard that a few times. So I'll conclude the majority of my remarks here with a case that gets to delegated design and the spear-in doctrine. Frucon Construction versus the United States. In this case, a contractor sued the federal government, basically making a spear-in claim that the plans and specifications that the government provided were inadequate. Frucon was doing demolition work, so they're a contractor who's doing demolition work, and they ended up overblasting concrete and then sued the government, arguing that they had followed the government specifications, and those specifications had led to overkill when it came to their blasting. There was an argument in this case about whether or not the government's blasting specification was prescriptive in nature or performance in nature. The problem with, and as you can imagine, a performance specification is far less likely to actually get a spurred warranty of adequacy rather than a prescriptive specification where the specification is actually specifying all of the blasting protocols that needed to be followed. The problem with Frucon's argument in this case, and I'll spare you reading through this entire case, but it was pretty clear that the specification was performance in nature. And the key piece of evidence here against the contractor was that they literally designed everything about their blasting protocols. The government's specification was they wanted a desired result. They wanted X amount of concrete removed. And Frucon went about putting together the entirety of the blasting protocol, so they're following essentially a performance specification. And they ended up over blasting what they were intending to blast. So from this case, we get that in what I think is a very common sense rule that if you design to a performance specification and the performance specification itself is not in error, then you don't get to come back and make a spurred argument that the architect's plans and specifications were inadequate in any way. What I think is a little bit more interesting about this case, I mean, I think that rule is fairly common sense, but what I think is kind of interesting about this case is that we get a really nice discussion about the difference between prescriptive specifications, other folks will call them design specifications, and performance specifications. The upshot is, and the court in this case decided was that it doesn't really matter what you call a specification. So if you put the word performance specification on a specification, that's not going to be what's controlling. What is controlling is the degree to which the contractor had discretion to accomplish the specification to make the determination. So that's the court is going to look beyond mere titles, and they're going to look to the nature of a specification and the discretion that the contractor had in accomplishing it. So in the Frucon case, as you can imagine, the contractor had a really good deal of discretion to design the blasting protocol, and so it was determined to be a performance specification, and flowing from that, the performance specification was deemed to not get spurred protection in the manner that it would have if it were a prescriptive specification. So I hope I haven't confused the issue too much with kind of the terms there, but I think that was pretty clear. So I'm now coming up on the end of the program. We also have, Steve, I've still got about 5 or 6 minutes here. Do you have any questions that are coming in from folks that I might be able to address?
Thanks, Mike. We do have a question or two that's come in through the chat. So if anyone does have questions, please feel free to enter them now. The first question, Mike, was from earlier on in your presentation. So let's see if we can tackle it. It states, where does shop drawings fit into your spectrum?
Oh, interesting. Where do shop drawings fit into the spectrum? I mean, certainly shop drawings are, I think they're a bit of a different animal. I'd honestly have to think about that a little bit more. But because shop drawings, you're not really delegating design. I mean, there's certainly elements of design going on when you create a shop drawing, but I don't think that in and of itself is going to be considered. I wouldn't consider that necessarily delegated design, but to be honest, I'd have to think about that a little bit further. I think that's really just a contractor showing how they intend to achieve a design that's been shown or already been detailed already by the design team. But I have to think about that a little bit.
Great. So does AIA contract documents have a contract insert to define definition and responsibilities that can be used, edited for the owner architect contract family and the owner contractor or CM contract family?
So and I don't have the opportunity to ask a follow-up, but I assume we're talking about, do we have a design assist contract? And right now, the answer is no. We're looking at developing. The first step for us was to really understand the landscape of design assist and delegated design. And then we're going to be, subsequent to that, we may end up publishing things that are more specifically tailored to those ideas. So be on the lookout here over the next couple of years for things that might be coming out. We do have a handful of documents that could be useful. For example, we have an owner consultant agreement. I believe it is our C-103-2015. You could imagine that being used as a design assist type of an agreement. You'd have to obviously put in the scope of work there. That's the one that's kind of immediately jumping out, but stay tuned. We're obviously thinking along these lines. So there will be stuff that we produce here over the next few years that'll probably more specifically address these two issues.
What about a situation where the architect is contracted by the owner on following design, bid, build, project delivery, but the engineering MEP designs is provided under design build contracted through the general contractor? How best to handle this situation?
Interesting. Yeah, I've definitely heard of that happening, and I'd probably want to ask follow-up questions on this one as well. It's not unheard of course, for mechanical systems to be done in a design build scenario, kind of separated out. And we do have an entire design build family of documents. They're really envisioned, and that's our A141 is the lead document in that family. But the way our contracts are set up is we have our design build contracts are really structured for the entirety of the project to be done in a design build manner, not just an element of it. So I think you'd have to go a little bit outside of the way our documents were intended to be used in order to accommodate something like that. We know it happens, right? So we know that it's not completely atypical, but I think you'd have to look at compartmentalizing, putting the design into our conventional conventional family of documents for architectural, structural, and other, consulting, and then doing the mechanical in some kind of design build, but we don't have like a clean way to do that in our existing contracts. Now, that was probably not the best answer, but it's probably the most accurate when it comes to how to use our contracts.
So without looking at an A133, can I presume that an A201 is a supporting document?
Yeah, so the A201 is the general conditions that is most commonly used with the A133 owner construction manager agreement, yes.
In delegated design, please comment on what level of professional liability insurance is provided. We use a tiered approach.
Well, that's a really good point, and actually one that I had in my notes that I did not mention. Is one way to address some of the issues of having split liability and split responsibility for design is to actually require the contractor and whoever the contractor is hiring to do design, their secondary design work, to actually have professional liability insurance. And I'm not sure about what a tiered approach means, so I'd want to ask follow-up questions on that. But it is certainly possible for anyone who's doing professional design work to get professional liability insurance. If I were an architect, if I were an owner and I was having someone doing delegated design, I would not only want to make sure that secondary design professional had professional liability insurance, I'd want to make sure it's at an appropriate level to respond to any kind of claims that might result out of that secondary design professional's services.
Lots of questions coming in about the PowerPoint and recording. So all registrants will receive the PowerPoint and recording tomorrow by email. So look forward for that. Does design assist or delegated design obligate the owner for general contractor selection for construction services?
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, I'm understanding that to mean that if you're doing design assist services, does that mean the owner then has to hire that company to do design assist or to do the actual construction? Not necessarily. Usually that's the way it works. I mean, usually if you've got a sub-trade who's doing design assist services, they're doing it because they have particular knowledge about their system, and they're giving the design team input early on about that particular system. Usually they're going to be hired, and the expectation is usually there that those subs or that construction manager is going to be used on the project. But that's not necessarily how it has to work. You can imagine scenarios, and it really just comes down to how you're going to structure your contracts. And if you're an owner and you want to make sure you're getting the best out of your design assist services, pay the contractors and the subs for the services that they're providing, and maybe not guarantee them that they're going to be getting the work down the road. But if it works out that way, then great. But usually folks are expecting to get the work. Not always the case, though.
So, Mike, we do have quite a number of questions that have come in. I think that's all the time we have today, but perhaps attendees can direct them to Doc Info.
Yeah, definitely. So we, and really good questions. And I certainly don't want to mean just because I've been talking here for the last hour about these things that I'm, the world's greatest expert on them. We definitely been learning about delegated design and design assist over the last few years in more detail than I ever imagined I would. But please, if you have questions that are further, send them to docinfo@aiacontracts.org. We'll do the best we can to get you an answer. And if we don't know the answer, we'll let you know that too. So also, if you want to give us a call, we have the number there. If you have any other questions about like our tech support kind of issues with regard to our software, we've got some contact information there as well. And if you want to see other videos that we've done or other webinars, go to our Learn page on aiacontracts.org. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this. I appreciate it.